Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ongoing Melons Australia series looking at leadership in the melons industry. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. And as I've mentioned, this is a continuous series, and we've talked to many individuals working in the melons industry. And my guest today works for Bayer. Can I welcome to this podcast, Damien Odgers? How are you, mate?
Yeah, well, thanks, Eric. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. Thank you for your time today. So, got a few questions to get through, but to start things off, a bit of an introduction to yourself, what you do at Bayer, and where you fit in the supply chain where melons is concerned.
Yeah, sure. So my role in Bayer is a business development role. It's quite a multifaceted role in the sense that it's a function that serves to support our sales team and technical team in supporting the technical sort of information transfer of our product range to melon growers. It also has a strategic component to guide the business in investing its R&D efforts in developing new solutions for melon growers from basically around the crop protection part of our business, although we do have a vegetable seeds breeding component to our business as well, which is involved heavily in melons. But my role is strictly related to the crop protection business, and that ranges from solutions in the biological product space and also conventional synthetic chemistry space of melon growing.
Excellent. And your connection with Melons Australia, Damien?
Yeah, so I sort of have a background. I've been involved with Melons Australia for, I think, 3 or 4 years now on the executive committee. When I first started, I was actually in a vegetable seed breeding role, mostly around supply chain. And I was involved with engaging post-harvest supply chain partners with regards to melon product. And that's how I became a part of the Melon Australia organisation through my involvement under the vegetable seed brand of Bayer at the time. I've since found my way back into the crop protection business where I'm still involved in melons, as I said, from a crop protection point of view. So that's sort of how I started with Melons Australia, and have continued serving on the committee ever since.
Your leadership and its beginnings, particularly in this industry. So step us through how that works. How that worked for you, sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it depends on how far you'd like to go back. It's, in my role, I'm heavily focused on grower engagement, our key customer engagement. So I work with a range of experts in the Bayer organisation across, as I said, seeds and crop protection, but I'm not managing anyone per se. So I guess the leadership comes around the collaboration with different stakeholders and the teamwork that we are imparting to get solutions to growers and to illustrate their benefit. As I said before, I was involved in supply chain as well in a previous role, so that did involve, again, other stakeholder engagement pieces around leadership as well. But yeah, as part of Melons Australia, it's a very dynamic position to be in as far as I represent a small part of the industry as a whole. But like to think that, coming from my side of the industry, I'm displaying some leadership qualities on the committee at a grower level that some others on the committee don't have. So it's we're all working together to achieve similar goals from that point of view.
You've met leaders in your travel, so the next topic area to discuss, and this is a good segue into that, mate, is leadership versus management. So, one, is there a difference in your experience, and two, how do you pen that difference between the leader and managerial function?
It's a really good question. I would say absolutely there is a distinct difference between leadership and management, and we see it very much in this sector, in the agricultural sector more broadly, but even specifically in the Bayer business, we see a very clear difference between the two. I think, to be a leader, you need the ability to be open-minded and lead by example. And I think showing social versatility to other people's personalities to get the best out of them, to identify with them in their role and encourage them to have a different mindset to I guess identify opportunity. And I think to be a manager is really around the setting a strategy, imposing rules, and not dictating per se, but it's a very different set of parameters to be a good manager in some sense. But they're sort of inextricably linked, if you know what I mean. Good managers are always very good leaders as well, so they sort of overlap quite heavily in that regard too.
That's consistent with what I'm hearing around the difference between the two, that you can have a leader with not so great managerial skills, but great leadership skills, and vice versa, managers that are quite good at the operational side of things, but not necessarily tied into the best outcomes in terms of being a leader. And that's consistent with any industry that you look at. Nobody does it perfectly, hence why we're continue trying to develop our leaders and managers.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important that, anyone showing leadership capability is always looking for that constructive feedback, who's, really willing to collaborate with a broad range of personalities. And we see that in Mellons Australia as well as within Bayer, in that, I think that in Mellons Australia, we sort of are trying to engage various aspects of industry to join the organisation, to take part in providing input around where we need to take the industry as a whole. How do we serve our industry, as in the growers, better? How do we engage them better? These are sort of the topics we're taking a leadership stance on. And I think that is no different within the Bayer organisation I work in day to day, where we're looking to engage internally and externally to become, better at what we do out in the field. So there's a lot of alignment between the two.
So you've probably been in this situation, and those that are listening that are in leadership roles at whatever level will probably relate to the following area. And it's not a term that I coined, but it's definitely worth using here, is this idea of a lonely road of leadership. Now, you've got to make decisions as a leader. At the end of the day, maybe the buck stops with you, and that can have its own issues. So is it a lonely road, Damien, or is it as lonely as you make it?
It's a really good question. I think there's moments where it can be a lonely road, but I'd like to think that the latter part of your comment is rings true, in that it's as lonely as you'd like to make it. And leadership is about a number of aspects, and I think the taking on feedback both from customers and peers constructively, or negative feedback and or positive feedback, I think that's really important. Willing to change your ways and be open to change, open-minded. I know in Bayer we have a very open cultural review of our company and how we engage our customers and how we work with one another within our organisation. Do that heavily every year, something the company prides itself on, and I'd like to think we can do something similar within Mellons as well, around how do we take a leadership stance and get better at what we're doing day to day. But it's certainly it can be a lonely road. I think leaders sometimes have to make some decisions that are unpopular, but it's about getting buy-in from stakeholders and getting them on the train to success, and getting the buy-in to the mandate that you're trying to instill with that leadership role. So yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted, that's for sure.
Damien, let me ask you about measuring success. So how is that done in your experience? I guess if we can use Bayer as an example, how do you measure success in your role with them, and how have you seen success measured from more of an industry perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. We obviously have the easy KPIs on I guess leadership and success, and that's around the financials, of course, how successfully the business is doing financially. But I think, feedback from, as I said, customers and internal colleagues and stakeholders is absolutely crucial. Year on year, I think it's how that reflects in your reputation of the brand that you're representing in your business. We do a lot of things in Bayer that aren't necessarily our core business, but address core customer needs about the sustainability and productivity of their business. Their prosperity is our prosperity. So we're really looking to focus on them and their needs rather than cater for our own. And I think that's a sign of a business is looking to have customers at the center of their company's strategy. And that sometimes means that we need a lot of feedback from them. And I think that's sort of where you find the difference between leadership and management too. So that's how generally we take on feedback from customers.
It's an interesting model to try and build trust, and I'm sure you've had success with that. Damien, let me ask you now around leader capability. So this one can get as nuanced as you'd like it to be, given that you've seen obviously what leader capabilities are needed in your own business, in Bayer. But I'd be interested to get your perspectives on one, that, and then two, what you see are critical leader capabilities from a Mellons industry perspective.
I had a bit of a think about this question. I really do believe that the core of which, the core skill that's really needed for leadership potential is around listening, and really listening to your target audience, and let's say it's your customer or a stakeholder within your organisation. In the case of Mellons Australia, listening, learning, and truly trying to understand and be empathetic to their needs and concerns. And that's really part of my everyday role within Bayer, is to engage customers, as I said. And I believe to be successful in my role, I need to be very skilled at listening and understanding, getting to the core of what they're asking us to do to help them in their business. And I think if you mirror that to what Melons Australia are trying to achieve right now, we've got a lot of challenges around grower engagement and investing in the future of our growers. And I think that if there's one criticism we've had in the past is around not listening to their key concerns and are trying to address them. I think with new leadership there and a cohesive group leading the industry, the peak industry body, we're trying to change that mandate or that direction that we're taking. And I think in both cases, it's really about listening and trying to understand the needs of your audience or your customer is really what are the skills I believe that you need to be successful in leadership.
I think communication is where you're getting at there. Comms, but being able to listen to the people that you're dealing with is a skill set on its own. And so, you can relate. So, Damien, let me ask you the following nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or are they made from your experience?
That's a really good question. Really, really good question. I honestly think there's both, if I can say that. I think there are certainly cases where I've encountered people over the years who I consider to be strong leaders, and quite frankly, I think that they've born to be great leaders in some regard. But can you improve your leadership capabilities over time? Absolutely. And I've seen and worked with people who have transformed themselves, and I think they've really changed from being, probably not touted as leaders to becoming really effective leaders. And so I think really it's probably more the latter. True leaders are made, but there's certainly an advantage in having, I guess, that natural tendency to be bold and confident, and but also willing to listen, as I said, and take on other people's perspectives, which I think is something that some people are born with and some people aren't.
I'm like you. I'm sort of a fence sitter is not the right word, but somewhere in the middle, because you've met people that have just got these skill sets without any kind of training of any description, whereas some need it and become absolutely very good at what they do. I think the trick there is identifying how do you find these people, the diamonds in the rough, if they exist in your business or in your industry, and then finding ways to get them on the track to being potentially next generation of leaders. So that's a whole nother podcast potentially around how you identify and source talent. But I think it's something that you've alluded to, and it's well worth considering. Did you have more to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, it's really a double-edged sword. I mean, I've been fortunate to be involved in a lot of trainings and leadership courses over the years where my employers have seen opportunity for me to develop in a leadership role. But I also see on the flip side, coming out of those and evolving as a professional, young professional in agriculture, that there's also a responsibility on my shoulders to improve the leadership capabilities of people around me and help them evolve into leaders as well, because I'm certainly of the opinion that you can help people really evolve and change and also become leaders in their own right. So getting back to that question, it can be certainly a bit of both. We'd like to think, certainly from a Bayer and a Melons Australia point of view, we can change and all become leaders at some point down the track.
Final set of questions, and I'll break this up into two components if you'll allow me, Damien. So looking back at your own leadership pathway, the first part of this question is, what have you learned looking back from a leader perspective, from Damien Odgers' view of the world, not necessarily anyone else's?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as I said earlier in the podcast, I've had various roles in the industry, and certainly in the Bayer organisation. It's over those years, you really encounter a lot of different personalities. People have a lot of strengths and weaknesses, and I probably in a former life was victim of being very isolated or sort of narrow-minded is probably the better word around, taking hold and showing leadership, traits, but in actual fact, I was probably creating a silo and thinking I can get things done my way or the highway sort of mentality. So really looking back, what I've learned is that you need to embrace people's strengths, people's different points of view, not to make assumptions about people. Really, as I said before, listen to their needs or their opinions. And relationships are critical, in leadership, whether it be internal or external to our business, in the melon industry as well. Relationships are key, and that's something we're trying to build upon in Melons Australia right now with not just the grower community, but other stakeholders in industry. We need to forge stronger relationships. So that's really some of the things I've learned in my journey as a leader. And don't make promises you can't keep. I would definitely put that in there as well. It's something in our industry you fall victim to very quickly if you're not careful. So certainly never make promises that you can't keep.
Interesting, Damien. So the second part to the question is let's do some potential looking forward here, a bit of forecasting if you can for me. What do you believe is critical in terms of leader development going forward, mate?
I was once quite, let's say, uninspired by the notion of training. And as I've grown up and developed in my role, I would absolutely say there's some great training courses out there for people who are aspiring to be better leaders. So I would encourage, both people within the melon industry and also within Bayer to look out for those opportunities. Embracing constructive feedback, looking to seek out constructive feedback, I think proactively is really important. As I said before, inclusion is really important to be a leader, I believe, and empowering others to, again, capitalize on the strengths and what they have to offer. To dialogue with team members and others, I think you work alongside is really important. And also, I believe the company making mistakes and learning from them. That's something that I think we're sometimes a bit allergic to, that we fear making mistakes and the fallout that comes with that. We need to be more comfortable with being bold, being brave, making errors along the way, but learning from them and changing direction as a result of that.
Damien, thank you for that. Look, this has been great, and you've summed up where things could go into the future, and a lot of those things that you just identified are building what I would consider, in my own humble opinion, to be critical for any leader in any industry. So it's good to get that from your perspective, and I know that's coming from a melons industry point of view, which is the purpose of having the discussion. So, mate, I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks for having me.
And for those listening, this has been the Melons Australia podcast on leadership. I've been speaking to Damien Odgers from Bayer. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll catch everyone on the next podcast.